Here, Rabbi Hoffman. He's going to be talking about exploring questions in the Torah in the age of uncertainty. Rabbi Joshua Hoffman was appointed as the president and CEO of the Academy for Jewish Religion, California in October 2022. Previously, Rabbi Hoffman served 18 successful years here at Valley Beth Shalom. He serves as the immediate past president of the Board of Rabbis of Southern California and played a crucial role in developing the Rabbinical Assembly's strategic planning process from 2015 to 2020, and recently served as fundraising chair for the Sandra Kaplan Community Bet Din. He received prestigious awards and has achieved an MA in Rabbinical Studies in 2003. He has received his MA in Education from the American Jewish University in 1999, and a BA in English and American Literature from Brandeis University in 1996. The Holiness of Doubt, Joshua's first book, published in 2023. It's on Amazon. I know I have it, and I've been very privileged to have personal conversations and discussions with a group of students regarding this book, and I hope you'll appreciate it as much as I have.
Good morning, everyone. Is it better with the microphone? Okay, so I'll speak with the microphone, but it does give quite a bit of echo. And if that becomes too distracting, I can always speak like this. Yeah? So what would you rather have? This? Yeah, okay, good. So, we're online. So no, I'm going to speak like this. We must speak in the microphone, and hello to all of our friends that are online as well. Thank you. So that's important. In fact, when there's conversation, I'm going to make sure that you also speak into the microphone so that those who are participating online can hear you. Good morning. This is a precarious time. It's a time of tremendous uncertainty. And I feel like whenever we gather, it's important that we add words from our eternal tradition that help us identify the many emotions that we are experiencing whenever we flip on a television screen or a computer screen and watch the news about what's happening in the world around us, and particularly for us in Israel right now. And today the subject is going to be a little bit about uncertainty and how to overcome it, and how, once again, the text of the Jewish tradition can offer us some insight. But before we even get there, I thought I would preface our learning with a reading from the Psalms. There are a selection of Psalms. They're called Shir HaMa'alot in the book of Psalms, and they talk about not only the leading up to the place in Jerusalem, not only physically, but ideologically and spiritually. And along the path one takes towards Jerusalem, these words were penned to help the traveler feel a sense of confidence along the precarious twists and turns of the journey towards a place of hopefully wholeness and peace, as the name Yerushalayim suggests. So I want to read one of them because I think it speaks to the truth of the moment. It's the 129th Psalm. A song of ascents. Since my youth, they have often assailed me. Let Israel now declare. Since my youth, they have often assailed me, but they have never overcome me. Plowmen plowed across my back. They made long furrows. The Lord, the righteous one, has snapped the cords of the wicked. Let all who hate Zion fall back in disgrace. Let them be like grass on roofs that fades before it can be pulled up, that affords no handful for the reaper, no armful for the gatherer of sheaves, no exchange with passerby. The blessing of the Lord be upon you. We bless you by the name of the Lord. In a time of great uncertainty, in the desire to unfurl our rage, our concern, let's remember in this prayer to find the blessings that exist between us. That's what the psalm teaches us, and may our learning bring that blessings for us together. That's my rabbi prayer. Good morning. So I can tell you that among the first days when I was on staff here at Valley Beth Shalom now, that was almost 20 years ago, that I was sitting on these steps. It was looking a little bit different back then. For those who remember, it was much browner back then. It's a lot brighter now. And there was a list of people that were being recognized for their generosity on the wall. And it was a preschool orientation. So I was sitting here with Rabbi Feinstein, and we were talking with the faculty about what it meant to be a member of the team to educate the youngest members of our community. And we're sitting there, and people were talking, and I noticed that one of the plaques was a little twisted. And I happen to be one of those people, those A-type personalities that when you see something slightly ajar, you could overlook it once or twice or 3 times, but after a while it starts to talk to you and says, "Why are you crooked?" So with the greatest respect and with what I thought was the most delicate of step, I went up and I started to try and adjust the plaque. And Rabbi Feinstein, with all of his wisdom, noticed that I was making this slight adjustment. And he was like, "Get used to it." There's a few things that are a little bit off the line around here. And it was a privilege because, we fixed that line. And for 18 beautiful years, there was a lot of things that we got into line here. And it is such a joy to return and learn with you with Hazak, a program that was just beginning in its infancy about 20 years ago. Do we know the history? Is it about 20 years? It's 23 years. So it was just in its infancy that this was happening. It's so privileged to once again return and present to this group today. So I actually taught a little bit about this for those who remember. And if you heard a little bit of this story, I hope that it'll be a delightful refresher. But I'm coming to talk a little bit about what it means to study a text again and again and again for a lifetime. As you heard in my brief biography, as a student, I studied English and American literature. And at that time in my life, I thought I was going to either be a lawyer or a doctor, because that's actually a really good preparation, English literature for medical school. And this wild idea of becoming a rabbi came into focus. And the reason that it became a lifelong pursuit for me was in part because after having all of this education on how to parse out text, how to understand Shakespeare, and why Shakespeare is one of the great classic works of literature that the history of humanity has ever recorded, that when you read the greatest text that history has ever recorded, you can continually read it and reread it and interpret it and reinterpret it. So it happened to be that a couple of years into my study, long after that moment when I was a student in my undergraduate years, and I was studying the Torah on a regular basis, years gone by, I was in the middle of one of the chapters of the book of Exodus. Immediately following the giving of the Ten Commandments, which is this extraordinary moment, the shofar blasts and the clouds pillowing over the mountaintops and the blare and the sound and the fire and the intensity. And then you turn the page and it's all a bunch of laws. Laws. You can do this civilly, you can't do this. What happens when you have people working for you? What happens if you cause somebody harm? What is the compensation for the harm that you cause another human being? Civil laws. And in the middle of that, which seems like a dry text, you all familiar with what I'm talking about? It's usually the stuff that we miss. It's usually the stuff that we don't talk about because we just finished the greatest part of the Torah, the giving of the Torah itself. And in the middle of that line, there is one law. It says very simply, and it makes a lot of sense. You're a landowner, and if somebody comes to you and they want to work your land, in other words, they're going to cultivate your produce for you, but they don't have any assurance. There's no security that they can give. There's no way that they can prove that when they're out there in your fields and you don't have eyesight on them, that they're just going to take your produce and run off with it. That the Torah says, when somebody comes to work your land, you shall take their garment from them. In other words, somebody says, I'm going to give you as collateral my coat. And that way, at the end of the day, to be sure, if I take anything of yours, you've got my coat, right? That's how collateral works. But then the Torah says, at the end of the day, you must return the garment to the person. It doesn't say if they did the work. It doesn't say if they asked nicely. It just says you must return the garment at the end of the day. And then it asks a question. It says, in what else will the person sleep? In what else will he sleep? So the Torah says, here's the rule. Somebody works for you, they give you their garment and collateral. The rule is you have to give it to them at the end of the day because God asks a question. What else is he going to sleep, right? So I'm reading this. I've been reading the Torah now for 15 years at the time that I'm reading this. And I'm asking myself, why is there a question right in the middle of this? Wouldn't it have been easier if God, who is the authority of all the righteous human behavior that we are commanded to obey and fulfill in our lifetimes, why didn't God just say, give it back to them? Why is it asked in a question? And when I read that, I scratched my head and I said, I can't believe this. Why are there questions in the Torah? Isn't the Torah all about authority? Isn't the Torah all about a sense of certainty in the world? And here is a question that says, give the garment back. And moreover, why is it that God would have, even the one who was asking the question, would have even thought to ask the question? Did God think that we might have been a little bit self-motivated and not wanted to give the garment back? And God wanted to make sure that we did it? Would that also not have been more effective if it wasn't simply a commandment? So the moment that God asked the question and I saw this, I was enlightened. And I thought, wow, what a great text again. And then what I did is I spent a summer taking all of the questions in the Torah. Some of them you know, right? God and Adam and Eve are in the garden and they're hiding and God asks, where are you? Which is an interesting kind of question all in and of itself. Or if you remember some of the text when Abraham is arguing with God about the destruction of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. And God says, will the judge of all the earth not act justly here? And what if there are 50 righteous people that are in this town? Will you destroy it on behalf of the 50 innocent people? There are tons and tons of questions. Am I my brother's keeper? These are all the familiar ones. Well, I spent a summer and I went through and I found out that, as now you could kind of say, oh, of course, there were quite a few questions, about 275 in all. And the reason I say about is because translation sometimes leaves us questioning whether a question is actually a question. And I say it's about because that's an easy number, a round number. but 275 questions, all in this book of divine truth. What is that saying to us? What does it mean for this book that you're going to be spending some time studying a little bit after we conclude our learning here this morning? What does it say for a book that's riddled with questions? What's the message that we should take away from that? I mean, we are a people that are most well defined by the questions that we asked. So I suppose you could say, well, since we're the ones that are keeping the record of our relationship with God, it only makes sense that we would have questions in there. Or maybe you might say that the book itself isn't so sure about the message that it's teaching. Because when do we ask questions? When we're not sure about the answers. And if that's the case, what does it mean for a book of divine truth? What does it mean for a book that's supposed to tell us how to be the best human beings that we could possibly be? If it's riddled with questions about the uncertainty of that way to be is meant to be lived. That was the introduction to this book. So I wrote all of the questions down and I cataloged them. And at first I thought maybe I could group them into categories. Like there's a few kinds of questions that the book asks. And when you read a question, then it's fitting in that particular category. And when I tried that project, what I discovered is that not only was each and every question complicated to fit into any one particular category, but I also found that some questions, as really good questions are, they fit into a bunch of different kinds of reasons that they are there. So what I did instead was I captured each question and I offered a little bit of commentary on them. I'm just one voice, and questions are not answered by just one person. In fact, that's what I thought we could spend a little bit of time taking a peek at. So if you have these packets, what I thought we'd do for a few minutes is I wanted to introduce you to some of the questions that maybe you haven't easily seen or you don't remember. And then let's just try to unpack why those questions are in the book. That was my project. My project wasn't to answer the questions. I mean, that would be fairly, I don't even know how to use the word, but that would be fairly self-serving for me to think that I had that much intellectual capacity to answer the questions that come out of God's book. But what it did was at least it allowed me to prompt why I thought the questions were there in the first place. And my invitation to you and for us in our study together is to explore with me why we think the questions were there in the first place. Okay? So take a look at, we're only going to go through a couple of these. I gave this to you so that you could see some of them. If anybody's interested in the book, I'd be so honored to share the book with you, and I have a few extra copies and would happily make that available, and it's also available out there in the world. This one comes from the book of Genesis, and it's the story of the Akedah. The Akedah, for those who are unfamiliar with the Hebrew word, literally means binding, and it is the binding of Isaac. It is the story of Abraham taking his son Isaac up onto the mountain, preparing to sacrifice him. And of course, for those who've read the story and remember, right at the moment that he's just about to plunge the knife into his son's chest, we assume that's where it's going, an angel stays his hand and says, "Don't, because your devotion to me is that complete." Well, before they get up to that moment, Isaac asks his father a question. So I like, if you're up for it, does anybody like to do a little bit of reading? Does anybody feel like they would like to read a little bit? I can do all of the reading. It's kind of strange to read your own words. May I suggest that we grab the microphone and thank you, Candy.
Do you want me to start? It is not our purpose.
Here are the firestone and the wood.
Okay. Here are the firestone and the wood. but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? Keep going.
Please.
Can we fully share our personal spiritual drama with others? Or is our experience of transcendence a solitary journey through which our loved ones and fellows are at best passive participants? In Abraham's journey up the mountain to offer his son Isaac, God tests the balance between the reality of other human beings in the quest for divine connection. Abraham's quest is toward the altar, but what is Isaac's quest here?
Okay, so pause for a moment. So as you're reading this story, we know the story from Abraham's vantage point, and this is one of the few moments that we hear Isaac actually speaking up. So when Isaac speaks, he asks a question. And as I'm inviting you to think with sensitivity, anytime you see the nature of an interrogative, the posing or the framing of language in the form of a question, it is prompting us to discover something deeper in the text than it might have been read on the surface. There is no question in all of those questions in the Torah that is superfluous. So this question, I suggest, introduces a very, very essential understanding of what is happening in the moment. Abraham is on his way to take his kid up to sacrifice. Where's Isaac? Does Isaac know that this is what his father's plan is? Is Isaac a willing participant? Can we really, even if dad said to son, I'm going up to sacrifice you there, does the son really fully, completely comprehend what that would mean for him and for his father? That's what this question prompts us to consider. So let's read on and see what else happens.
Isaac's question to his father is remarkably simple. He asks, here are the firestone and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? If the journey is to connect with God, what is required to fulfill such a task? In those days, an animal to kill seemed logical for an offering, a sacrifice to God. The pause between the question and response here fosters a chasm of interpretation, whether or not Isaac inferred that he would be the sacrifice to God. The question is presented to us as a dramatic unfolding of a relationship between parent and child, where Abraham reveals and withholds information is among the most dramatic elements of the Akedah narrative, presumably with God as well.
Hold on just a moment. It's a big paragraph. And the phone's ringing. Natural pause. So it's a very simple question. We've got the fire, we've got the wood, we've got where's the animal? Right? That seems like a pretty simple question. And you would say it makes sense because every other time that you make offerings, these are the things that you need. So Isaac's question is very simple in that respect. And yet, what is so powerful about the story is what is not being said. What is not being said? And we're going to figure out how this is responded to in the unfolding words that we're going to read here. We know the story, but what I want to share with you is the power of the question is not just simply about an exchange of information. We may think that when we ask questions of other people, all we're looking for is the answer. And there are plenty of times that we do that. But think about it in your own lives. When do you pose questions and you are seeking something more than the information? More often than not, that's exactly what we do. Think about it for those of you that are children, have children or grandchildren, and you know that they've done something wrong. And you ask them, did you do that? Right? You know that they did that. You're obviously not looking for the answer in and of itself. But behind the answer is a point of connection, because the child's recognition that you recognize something reveals the building of a relationship. Here is the sensitivity of the moment. Isaac's asking for a relationship with his dad the moment he's about to be sacrificed, and all we hear is a deafening silence. Silence. What is happening there? Please continue.
We assume Abraham doesn't want to disclose the nature of their hike prematurely, but that is based on the assumption that his task is fraught with uncertainty. Abraham's response also confirms the vague sense of purpose he is to share with his son, as if to say that the goal is to follow God's instructions as they are given, even if Isaac did not hear them being commanded.
Go on, please.
To read this question as a deep exploration of Abraham's individual quest is to recognize there is also a limit to his shared experience. The idea that as individuals, our spiritual quests are unique and at times solitary, validates the ultimate purpose for divine presence and must include a measure of individuality.
Hold on for that. I know it was a long word, and I'm looking, this was a little bit before the final edit, so it was a little bit of a twisty sentence, but that's okay. Think about what this is saying is, there's a limit to our ability to share our experience. When do we ask questions of each other? When we want to open ourselves up and know others and be known better. But even there, doesn't it have a limit? Isn't there something, whether our language is incomplete or our ability to convey the depths of our experience with word or with action, there's a limit. Abraham has a limit here. And Isaac has a limit here. And the reason that the question exists is because they're going up on top of a mountain to have the greatest unlimited expression of God commitment. Abraham is going to take his beloved child and to offer him up as a sacrifice. He's willing to give up his entire being for his devotion to God, everything that he ever has. And boy, is that filled with uncertainty, because there's a limit to that. Please, Candy, thank you so much for reading, if you're still up for it.
Building a religious doctrine upon collective understanding, by contrast, requires an openness to share intention and purpose, even when those goals are not yet completely formed. When collective understanding and openness are absent, we walk toward the altar uncertain we possess all the necessary gifts to make offerings to God. Isaac may be asking about a sheep, or Isaac may be even asking about himself, or Isaac is seeking the most essential element of the religious experience, that of authentic connection. His father provides an extraordinary answer here. God will see to the sheep for his birth offering, my son. The next line is so poignant, and the two of them walk on together.
Thank you so much. Okay, so hold on a little bit to digest. What happened? What happened? Yeah, hold on just a second. Or were you going to share what happened? Or do you want to ask a question about it? Let me just summarize, and then I want your question. Right? Beautiful. This is the religious experience that we're meant to take away from this story in a way. It is another way. And the thing that we might have been so perplexed in this story is that it's the story of one man's journey to the top of the mountain and is willing to sacrifice any future connection for that. And yet there's this other side of it. Maybe even Abraham at that moment, this is my guess, knew that he was never going to have to kill his son. Maybe he knew that. And that's why he didn't answer with, "Where's the sheep?" He said, "You're the sheep, my son," because that would have been a very different story indeed. But what he said is, God will provide the sheep. Abraham opens himself up and says, "My son, we are being witnesses to an experience of divine presence that neither of us have ever experienced before." And that's why the last line, or the response is, "And the two walk together." So I bring this as an example, and then I'll take your question, that the question itself is not simply to move the narrative forward. This is not just trying to figure out whether or not Isaac was aware of what was happening. This is a story, and this is an experience that is meant to expand what it means to be in presence with something that we call divinity. Dr. Dosick.
Before you said what you just did, what do you think Isaac was feeling at the time he asked the initial question? Because there was a human sacrifice going on at that time historically. And, my own thought when I listen to this every year is that Isaac is really frightened. And that question is coming out of fright. And then you said that Abraham was really confident that God would, in fact, provide the sacrifice, and that the two of them walked on together, to me indicates that Isaac believed that his father's confidence was really all he needed to assuage his fear.
I think what's wonderful, thank you. So the comment, just to respond for those in case you didn't hear it, is that one reading of this, it's not the only reading, but another way to read this is that Isaac and Abraham know exactly what is happening in this moment all together. And this exchange is about them coming to a greater understanding than they would have had before. We know historically that there were other religious movements at that time that did venerate the sacrifice of children, the god of Molech, right? Which we have in Hebrew later, Melech. When we call Melech and Molech, they're the same origins. The origins of the Judaic religion do have precursors in child sacrifice. And it's very possible that we're reading one layer of this story is the antithesis of that. It's the argument, it's the apology for not sacrificing your children, even though that's exactly what everybody else was doing. But what's powerful about this, and what I think Dr. Dosick has noticed as well, at the end, they have a common understanding. The scariest part of this story is that the father knows something and the son doesn't. And you don't have to read it that way. That's what this question opens up for us. And if you don't read it that way, it helps you perhaps maybe even expand your understanding of why it's in the book in the first place. Because I come to this every year and I think, this is the worst story I would ever have in my book of sacred literature ever. I don't want to be a part of a religion that a God makes me go and take my child up to the mountain and sacrifice it. And yet I have to read it year after year to remind me that's exactly right. Yep, thank you. Before we go further, any comments, questions? How you doing? You see what I seen and what we see here? This is it's kind of fun when we read the book this way. So let's do another one. Turn the page. This one is not coming up this week. It's coming up the following week. I'm sorry, in 2 more weeks. So this is the story. It's on the back of page 1. That would be page 2. Back of page 1 is page 2. Bottom right-hand corner is where the page number is. Defining friendship through questions. Is there anybody that would like to read this for us? If you're up for it? Thank you, Sandy.
I guess am I on again?
She was like, I don't know,
Here
but maybe.
again.
So would you mind
again.
bringing her the
All
microphone?
right, sure.
No. Can't.
Oh, somebody else? Yes, yay.
Thank you. Do you mind? Thank you.
My Yahweh, what's 400 shekels between me and you for this land? We often meet the people with whom we eventually develop meaningful relationships in times of need and uncertainty. These moments where we are open and vulnerable become the opportunities for others to see reflections of our authentic selves. More than the revelation of ourselves to others, we can also see the truth of others in moments of uncertainty. At some point, the question of, who is this person to me, comes into focus and comes to define who becomes our friend and who is an associate, a helper, or a stranger along the way.
So this is my introduction. I think when we develop relationships. Part of it is about the sort of mutual recognition that there's something beneficial that our friendship can produce together better than on our own. And then there's this other part, which I think is fairly fundamental. Who is the person to me? What kind of person am I in reflection of them, in relation to them? We know that, younger children don't easily understand this. This is an evolved kind of way of being, because sometimes young people make friendships based on just the ability to play together. But real relationships, long-lasting relationships, more than just, the chronology of time, of experience. Real relationships are those in which you, as an individual, continually see who you see yourself to be reflected in the other some way. Right? So here's an example of that right in the Torah.
Abraham's purchase of Ephron the Hittite's property is not simply a transaction to confirm ownership. There's a potential relationship emerging between the two that the verses of the Torah capture. This potential is revealed when Ephron asks, "My Yahweh, what's 400 shekels between me and you for this land?" Rather than the record of a transaction, Ephron's questions reveals a desire for a relationship, particularly since the question details between me and you.
So you see how the question is in the Torah, the question is in the book, and it's posed in a way that says between me and you. Something that actually you don't see very often. Now, for anybody who's studied a little bit of the text, this sounds very cultural, right? Ephron the Hittite, he's not of the Abrahamic tribe. He's not from the motherland. He's somebody who's actually sort of one of the original dwellers there. This is sort of you think it's like negotiating in the bazaar kind of conversation. What, my friend, is 400 between you and me, but give me 400, right? You'll think that he's like being friends. But there's something even deeper than that. And that's something that you have to read because of what happens. And by the way, for those who understand a little bit about biblical times, biblical culture, 400 shekel wasn't a small sum. It's a pretty big sum at that point. And a shekel wasn't just those little coins that you have in your pocket now that keep getting smaller and smaller. They were probably like big rocks of silver. So that depends on what you find from the archaeologist. But go ahead, please, Sandy, read some more.
Classical commentary will pick up on this sensitive reading as well. Rabbi Shlomo Isaki, or Rashi, the great Torah commentator, outlines the statement as one of friendship. Rashi writes, "Between two friends as we are, of what importance is that? Nothing at all. Leave business alone and bury your dead." A few generations later, Obadiah Sforno, another great Torah commentator, depicts this exchange as a minor transaction, stating, "It's so insignificant a matter that the acquisition can be made by a mere declaration without being recorded in a document."
So one way to understand this is exactly what you would read on the surface, that Ephron says, what's 400 between us? This is when friends, why are you worried about money right now? You have to bury your loved one. Why are we worried about money? This is such a trivial matter. This is not trivial, by the way, in questions. This is such a small amount. Let's take care of what's really important. And Abraham is all of a sudden, it's putting it back on Abraham. He was concerned about making sure that he was behaving properly. But he has a friend that's telling him, your posture, your formal stature is meaningless in the humanity that you and I are exchanging. So continue on, please.
In both comments, the sense that the financial exchange is trivial compared to the magnitude of need reveals a social construct that is meant to build relationships. When matters of life and death come into focus, the mechanics of connections with others are less concerned with the transactional nature of the relationship and more concerned with the integrity or dignity of being human. The focus on friendship, or in later episodes of this portion, familial connections, is as important as our duty to care for others for ourselves and the people whom we define as of immediate concern.
Thank you very much. So the last comment, right? So you have these classical commentators, and they come and say, Ephron the Hittite, even though it was a significant sum, is trying to say your concern is not the most important one, and friendship is what helps put our needs into perspective. Why do we read this book? Because that's the kind of guidance and wisdom that we need in our lives. Hold on just a second. Ask the question again.
Was Abraham trying to buy this land as a burial site for his for relatives or for himself? It isn't clear from the text you've got here.
So the question is, what was Abraham's purpose in having this conversation? We do have other language that helps us understand that Abraham is going to Ephron the Hittite, and he needs to bury Sarah. Sarah has died. So this is not pre-planning, right? This is not Mount Sinai on a Sunday morning with bagels and orange juice. This is the death has occurred, and he needs to bury his wife, and he's living in this area. It's called Kiryat Arba, and he needs to bury his wife. This is Hebron. This is the place. It's called the Ma'arat HaMachpelah. So Abraham buys this land from Ephron the Hittite, right? If you want to play, modern day geopolitics in the Middle East, this is how land disputes are. This is where land disputes are argued. They're trying to figure out who was there first, who owned the land, who paid for the land. And this place, Hebron, is in tremendous contention because there was maybe disagreement about what happened there. That's another interesting piece. Not for our study today. Anything else? How's everybody doing? Okay? Let's just do one more and then we'll call it for a day. And I just want you to see, these are just examples that are coming out of these were just two in the book of Genesis. How many of you were familiar with the stories before we started? Very familiar, right? How many of you ever paid attention to the fact that there were these questions in the book at that time? Maybe a little bit here, right? Let's turn to one let's go to one that I think we don't see. Okay, turn to the last page.
Who wants to read?
May we have one more reader,
I'll pick
please?
Somebody. How's that one?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Joyce. So it's on the last page, page 5, conditional love.
Conditional love. And now, O Israel, what does Yahweh your God demand of you? The places where a question, specifically an interrogative, is used to cultivate responsibility is as much a literary tool as it is the foundation of a deep connection or relationship. When Moshe asks the Israelites to consider, and now, O Israel, what does Yahweh your God demand of you? The response that follows is more than a litany of rules. Demands like revere Yahweh your God and walk in God's ways are incredibly open-ended. In constructing this part of his speech, Moshe is describing requests from God that transcend specific actions or precise behaviors. It appears that God is asking for loyalty from one's soul.
Okay, thank you. Hold on a second. So here's another question. This comes from the book of Deuteronomy. This is towards the end of the book. Moses is looking out at a new generation of Bnei Yisrael. They're about to enter into the land. And the Torah has been accumulated and recorded, presumably at this point. And Moses now turns to the people and says, and so now what does God demand of you? I mean, what Moses could have simply did was pick up the book and say, here's the rule book, follow it, 1, 2, 3, Shabbat and kosher, all the things that Jews do. But what you see is something else. It's not just simply about God asking for you to observe mitzvot. God says you're to walk in God's ways. Well, if you were to answer the question, what does it mean to walk in God's ways? You go back in the book and there's all of the list of all the things that one would do, because that presumably is the guidebook. It's the playbook of walking in God's ways. You could see it that way. Or maybe, as I'd like to suggest, this is less about an answer of specific behavior, and it's about something that's far more internal. It's far more relational. Loyalty, connection. God is asking for loyalty. How do you demonstrate loyalty? You know this, right? Because you're loyal to the people in your family, in your community, in the world around you, to Israel. We have loyalty to these places and these people. But is it the totality of your behavior that defines that loyalty? Something on the inside. So please.
Theologically, this relationship makes sense. Divine authority in its perfection is a commanding force. Human beings, in their fallibility, respond. Philosophically, though, this entire teaching from Moshe is defining a relationship future generations will have with the God of their ancestors, in itself an abstraction of perfection.
So just to sort of like filter out all of the fancy words, basically what's happening here is this is not about a backwards facing or a backwards viewing kind of question. This is about a forward looking question, right? What will God demand of you? What is it going to look like in the future? And that is something that we kind of like think about imperfection. We think about whatever the future is going to be the way that we ought to behave. It's our hope for the way that things are going to be. I mean, even the pessimist has a hard time contending with the fact that the future is a perfection that exists out there in our mind without having to come up with all the reasons that it's not going to be that perfect. So here God is saying, what is God demanding of you? Walking in God's ways. That sounds like a perfect answer to the question, right? And figure out what that means moving on. Please continue.
This question has an exquisite quality to it that only emerges from a relationship that has already withstood challenges, tests, and triumphs. This question defines love. To know love has an iridescent and transcendent quality of reverence and movement suddenly makes qualities like love quite tangible. It is only after a journey like the Israelites have endured with their God that a request or a demand for love is even possible.
Thank you. In other words, you can't when you talk about loyalty, you can't demand loyalty without having some kind of example that would demonstrate what would be the expression of loyalty or the demonstration of loyalty. And so that's what the whole book has been all about. The idea that they've endured this journey through the desert, the idea that they've experienced a redemption from enslavement, that they've stood at a mountain and received divine wisdom. All of those examples demonstrate that this kind of connection is possible. And then, only then, can you talk about love. Think about, this is my favorite. I am a student of Ed Feinstein's. And we talk about the sort of, Golda and Tevye in the Shalom Aleichem novel of Fiddler on the Roof, right? Or Tevye the Milkman, right? And the question is, do you love me? And what does she say, Golda? For 25 years, I did this and this and this and this. And if that's what love is, then I guess I love you, right? And what does he say? Well, then I guess I love you too, right? It's a beautiful moment. The definition of love is not something that can be concretely defined in a compact, easily ordered definition that you would pick up on a phone or go into the Webster's dictionary. It's not something that you can simply answer by giving words to define it. It is only defined by experience. Okay? So, with that in mind, now what? In essence,
In essence, God's request as framed by Moshe is more conventional, more covenantal than the introduction of mitzvot atop Mount Sinai. The Torah teaches us more than a specific path of behavior. In fact, Jewish tradition will continue to evolve from a glimpse into holy behavior that the Torah revealed throughout the generations. The demand for love and reverence are ephemeral qualities, unbound by time or space. The real quality of being in love begins after the request or demand for love has been met. Yes, there are demonstrable acts that support and nourish loving relationships, but the quality of being in love is something that can only be deepened after all the demonstrations are established. We act lovingly so we may be loving.
Go ahead and finish, please.
The book of Deuteronomy powerfully captures this aspiration throughout most of the book. Here, a question typifies the ultimate goal, sharing one's soul fully with the God of all.
Thank you very much. Okay, and as that concludes just some selections of the book, the last sentence, I think, or the last statements make it clear why a question like this exists in the book, right? That the point of God asking this demand or demanding something, demanding love from us, ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, is only after we have already demonstrated loving behavior. I think that we can ask and demand love from each other. It's kind of a scary thing to do. It's kind of hard for us for most of our lives. But it's easier for us to demand love, ask for love, celebrate and share love when there has been demonstrations of that loving behavior. We act lovingly, this question implies, so that we may be worthy of loving, and in this case, being loved. This, my friends, is totally different than perhaps our Christian compatriots that understand love to be a divine flow for which we are simply recipients of it, and we have nothing but to express our love in response. This is a very Jewish definition of love. Act lovingly, and then you start to show the love, right? For the 25 years that you did all the things that you did, I think that's probably a pretty good start to define it. It isn't pessimism. It's not skepticism. It's not a shrewd sense of expectation that we as sensitive beings expect from other people so that we can be vulnerable. This is what people who are friends, lovers, in relationship do for each other. And I would say beautifully, for the Torah, what we do to be in relationship with God. The definition of being in relationship with God is showing loving behavior. And then you can understand what I think this book has been trying to get at. What does God demand of you? Only to love God and revere God and walk in God's ways. So these are some of the questions. And I thought I'd sort of like bring it to conclusion and open it up. If you had any questions or some comments or would like to know a little bit more about the book, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, Helen.
So they're traveling through the desert for 38 years, and we're talking about a brand new generation. I was thinking, isn't this something that needs to be taught or learned if you're talking about love and you're talking about a brand new generation that's sort of coming into its own?
Great.
I don't know exactly how to phrase what I'm
No, absolutely. So just to reiterate, the question was, it seems like if the end of the book is to say, just love God, that there would need to have been some education to that moment. That's precisely what this comment is. And that's what I was trying to demonstrate, but I'll say it again. This question could only have been asked after there was that education. So the story, when you read it, is that there's a whole generation that has been learning the Torah. In fact, they're the first students of the Torah. They're not the generation that was living in the desert so much, or the generation that was living in slavery in Egypt, right? They're a whole new generation, and they're trying to figure out which way is up. And they've been taught. It's not only that they're taught, keep Shabbat, keep Kashrut, observe the holidays, act ethically. They got all of that stuff. But then it's like, once you've learned all of that stuff, what for? What's the reason? For love. Because that's right. And you could say the end of the book has very much that sense. Does that make sense? It's a good comment. Jerry's back there.
You just made reference before to the fact that questions are very Jewish. And I just wanted to share an anecdote, historical anecdote, that maybe you can package and use at your next talk, which is about questions. If you saw the movie Oppenheimer, it had a rich cast of important people in the Manhattan Project. One of them was Rabbi. And the movie didn't explore that, but he was the most observant Jew in that whole movie. And he had his own brilliance. He won the Nobel Prize, and of course was interviewed about the Nobel Prize when he won it for physics. And somebody asked him, to what do you owe this wonderful recognition? And he said, he was very Jewish, I mentioned, he said, my mother. and they said, well, was your mother a physicist? Or, education? What did she do? And Rabbi said, I would come home from school. My mother would be at the sink preparing dinner or whatever, and she would greet me and she would say, Yitzchak, did you ask any good questions today? And that's how, she didn't say, how did you do at school? She didn't say, what did you learn at school? Mm-hmm. He explained, she taught me question. That is the key to how he got to be a Nobel Prize winning
Wonderful.
physicist.
Thank you, Thank you for that wonderful comment. And there are also examples of Albert Einstein, another great physicist, who absolutely believed that the curiosity that prompted him to look at the world differently and discover a new way of understanding the nature of the universe came out of his upbringing. So we have a very proud heritage of this curiosity that comes right out of our book. So if one was to say, thank you, Jerry, for sort of perhaps bringing us to the nice little button on our talk this afternoon, is that the Torah, our sacred text, has questions not to create a sense of uncertainty about absolute truth, but to give us permission, to invite us to ask the questions, to discover the deeper truths that are found therein. And I hope that you find that journey in whichever way that you study, whether it's within the text or whether it's in whatever field of interest that you have. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and learn with you this afternoon. Wish everyone well.